Good morning. Okay, today's daf is Yevamot daf Nun Bet 52. We are at the last few words of daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet, daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet 51b. Let me share my screen. And so our Mishnah is continuing. Our Mishnah it contained a debate between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim. Rabbi Gamliel said that both get after get and mamar after mamar do not work, meaning that the second action does not count, does not have any legal validity. And so, the one done with widow number one will work. So again, Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Reuven dies, and now Rachel and Leah fall to Shimon to do Yibum or to do Chalitza. And Shimon does first Mamar with Rachel and then Mamar with Leah. And so Rabbi Gamliel says the Mamar with Rachel works. That's a valid Mamar. That's a Mamar that has effect. But because he says Mamar after Mamar does not work, the second Mamar, the second one to Leah, has no legal effect. And in particular, in that instance, what does it mean to have no legal effect? It means that Shimon is not limited in his ability to marry Leah's relatives. Because ordinarily, after, with respect to Rachel, for example, after he's done Mamar with her, then he's no longer allowed to marry any of her immediate relatives. He's not allowed to marry her mom, her sisters, and her daughters. And so that's the meaning that it doesn't have any legal relevance. And on the other hand, we had the Chachamim. The Chachamim said get after get and Mamar after Mamar do have a legal effect. The Mamar with the second woman requires a get. And the Mamar with a get with the second woman would prohibit the second woman's relatives to Shimon. So that is the machlokas. And the Mishnah then asked, what was the case about which Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim were arguing? Ketzad, what are we talking about here? And the Mishnah did not immediately begin discussing the case of get after get with one husband and two wives, but rather the Mishnah begins by discussing the case of a single widow where Mamar is done and then a get is given. And so the Gemara today begins by quoting this language and seeking an explanation for why the Mishnah didn't describe the case of get after get and Mamar after Mamar. So let's take a look and we'll go inside, see this inside. So Ketzad asa Mamar, that was what our Mishnah said. How is it that what's the case of Mamar? And then it says, Hi get after getu. The first case in our Mishnah was a get after get. So what are you? This is not a case of get after get. It ends up being a case of get after Mamar. Amar Rav Yehuda Hachikamar. So the Rav Yehuda says, no, just you need to sort of read in an ellipses. So get after getu Mamar Mamar kid Amran. And Rashi explains, third line down in Rashi on Nun Bet Amud Aleph, as now we're on Nun Bet Amud Aleph, the Baraisa, that when it says that we just said, what get after get and Mamar after Mamar, it's talking about the Baraisa that we learned yesterday, where it went through the steps of a man having two widows, and then the brother giving a get to one and then the other, or doing Mamar with one and then the other. So that was covered by the Brisa. And then Yavam Echad v'Yavama Achas. And then the question is what about if there's only one Yavam and one Yavama, one widow and one brother left? So then Ketzad Tarasan, what's the manner in which they are, released? So Asa Mamar bivimto v'nasan la get. So if he did Mamar with her and then gave her a get, that would still Trika Hemeno Chalitza. That would still require Chalitza. And so that is just an explanation of how the relationship of the different actions when you're dealing with one brother and one widow. And so that is the explanation of our Gemara, of our Mishnah. And so our Mishnah never really explained the case of mamar after mamar and get after get, but rather it relies on the brisa that we quoted yesterday to provide that explanation. So now the second point for today is our Mishnah had said asa mamar uva'al harezo kamitzvasa, that if in fact first mamar was done and then marital relations happened to complete the yibum. And again, as a reminder, marital relations are the main biblical method, or it's not even main, the biblical method of performing yibum. So as a result, and so our Mishnah said that first doing mamar and then doing yibum, having relations, that is the mitzvah of yibum. So lema misayeh Rav Huna. Does this serve as support for Rav Huna's statement? To Amar Rav Huna, mitzvahs Yevamot mekadesh v'achar kach bo'el, that the main mitzvah of yibum is to first do some level of kedushin. That's referring to mamar, and then bo'el, and then having relations, and that is the in Rav Huna's view, the preferred approach. So you don't have to say that in fact this is supporting of Rav Huna, but ema afzeh kamitzvasa. The point of our Mishnah is to say that even that approach would be considered a mitzvah. Yes, doing yibum directly would be a mitzvah, meaning having relations to fulfill the marriage, that would be a mitzvah. But so would doing mamar and then having relations also constitute the mitzvah of yibum. Well, one second. If that were the case, if it were only trying to tell us that it's also a mitzvah, well then pshita, isn't that pretty obvious? No, it's not obvious, because salka daita chamina, I would have thought, kaven de amar mar, since we had said ha'ose mamar b'vimto parcha haimenu zikas yavamin, that maybe we could say that because a person performed mamar with the widow, so parcha haimenu zikas yavamin, so the yibum attachment has left, and maybe the chala alav zikas are erisin v'nesuin, and maybe now that you did an act that sort of finished and eliminated the zika relationship, because now it's more like a marriage, because the act that you did was an act of kedushin, meaning to speak and say hareyad mekudeshesli, as we'll see in a moment. And so that act, aim alav mitzvah kavod, maybe it's no longer the fulfillment of the mitzvah of yibum. It will be an act of marriage, which is, maybe its own mitzvah in its own right, but in any event, it won't be the mitzvah of yibum. So kamash malan. So the Mishnah is teaching us that yes, you might have thought that now that you did mamar, it would not be considered the mitzvah. You would no longer be able to do the mitzvah of yibum because you were acting like a regular marriage. No, we will treat the marital relations that are had like yibum, and it will be a mitzvah. All right, so now we've explained that we can't say it's a proof, but gufa, Amar Rav Huna, mitzvahs yevamim mekadesh v'achar kach bo'el. We just said that Rav Huna said that it's a mitzvah the mitzvah of performing yibum is to first do mekadesh, namely to do ma'amar, what we are calling ma'amar in the context of yibum, and then to have marital relations, and that will complete effectively the wedding ceremony, and the brother and his brother's widow will become a married couple. The imbal the asamamar. Now, what happens if he just went ahead and had relations and then he did mamar, meaning he did it out of order, kana, it's still a valid marriage. Now the Gemara asks the question, what's even the question? Involve asa mamar pshita. Of course he acquired her if he did be'ila and then mamar. That's the biblical commandment. When the Torah tells us about Yibum, the method of the brother of Shimon becoming married to Reuven's widow Rachel is doing be'ila, is having marital relations. So isn't that obvious? The hakanya b'via, that she's acquired through bia. Ela ema imbal below ma'amar kana. The point is that what Rav Huna is saying is that even if no mamar is done, then it is a good acquisition. Vatanya loka. One second. We have a brisa that actually says that doing doing marital relations as the method of marrying a Yevamot without having done mamar in advance, you get lashes. That makes it sound like it is prohibited in the Torah not to do mamar first. No, it is not, in fact, a Torah prohibition. The Gemara now says is, but makas mardas midirabanan. It is not a biblical lashes, it's a rabbinic lashes. And so as a result, it's part, while we don't want, we'll see in a minute why, we don't want the person to do the marital relations without having first done mamar. If they do the marital relations, it is a valid biblical marriage. To Rav Mangid, that what Rav would give out lashes for the following situations. Okay, and now we're going to have a list of 8 situations that Rav would give lashes for, and we'll see that all of them, or many of them, involve an aspect of immorality. So let's take a look at them. So who would Rav give lashes to? Number one, Rav de Mekadesh, Aman de Mekadesh Bivia. Number one is somebody who gets married without, and does cohabitation, meaning has marital relations, as the method of doing kedushin. Uman de Mekadesh B'shuka. And also, if you get married in the marketplace, and if we, again, I'm sorry to realize I should have mentioned the Rashi. Rashi says, Mishum, that why is it a problem to marry somebody with bia? From a biblical perspective, before the giving of the Torah, that was the only way that anybody would get married. People would get married by having marital relations. And so, but Mishum Pritzusa, that it is there's an immoral aspect. And it's actually a beautiful thought to say that a marriage should not be only about marital relations. And if marital relations are the start of the marriage, then that's probably not the healthiest thing for the marriage. Uman de Mekadesh, and so the second category is Man de Mekadesh B'shuka, that somebody who gets married in the marketplace. And again, we're not talking about getting married with bia, with the marital relations, God forbid, in the marketplace, but even with money, Rashi points out. And again, it's just not a nice way to act. A marriage is not meant to be a public, open to everyone. It's meant to be for those who care about the people. That's who should be there. Uman de Mekadesh below Shidduche, and then similarly getting married without some aspect of shidduch, of having some kind of agreement. So just proposing at first sight, essentially. Uman de Mivadel, although it sounds quite romantic, probably not a great idea for a long-lasting relationship. Uman de mevatel gita. So also somebody who sends a get, and after he sends it, he then calls the messenger and says that get that I gave you is no longer valid, and now we have a problem because a man is the messenger is walking around with a get that looks valid but is not, and that could lead to very bad things. Namely, if the get is given to the wife and the wife thinks she's divorced, she could marry somebody else, and that would, one, violate the Torah prohibition of engaging in marital relations with a married woman, and two, it would potentially, if she gave birth, it would result in a mamzer, according to every opinion. Umanda maser moda'a agita, and then similarly, somebody who says, who gives a warning about a get, namely that the get was not given voluntarily, same problem. Again, it can lead to bad conditions. Umanda defakir shlicha derabanan, and then somebody who is inappropriate towards the messengers of the rabbis. Uman dishay shamta derabanan alei tulasin yomin v'lo asi leveidina v'tava l'shamte, and somebody who was excommunicated for 30 days and doesn't come to try and appeal his excommunication, meaning he's appreciating his excommunication. He's sort of like reveling in it. So that is not the kind of behavior that we want to tolerate. But al chasana da'er b'vei chamuhi. And then the last of the cases, then the case number 8, is a groom who lives in his father-in-law's house. So what's the issue there? Well, we'll see in a moment that there's a concern of potential inappropriate relationships between a mother-in-law and her son-in-law, because the mother-in-law is so excited by the fact that her daughter is getting married. So what does this imply? This implies that actually living there is the problem, but but just passing by is not a problem. But 1 second, there was a guy who spent some time in his father-in-law's house. And Rav Sheshes gave him lashes. So the Gemara explains how who made him have a diyayim machmate. That there we're talking about a situation where the groom was suspected of having some kind of connection with his mother-in-law. And so as a result, because that already warning had been given, when they actually just went for a visit, that was a problem. I will note that, in fact, we generally do not paskin that, excuse me, that this is a halachic problem today. You are allowed to visit your in-laws. A man is allowed to visit his in-laws. However, in general, that's because we say that and even to live with them, because presumably they're doing for financial reasons. The issue is really, as long as it's not clear, as long as it's not inappropriate behavior that seems somehow likely to happen. Indeed, some people say this is talking about where there was only one room in the home, and so as a result, that would be more problematic. All right, so Nihar Da Yamri, the people from Nihar Da qualified all of this and said it wasn't all 8 of these cases, but rather actually it was just one combination of cases. But Rav didn't really give lashes for any of these cases except for the following: where you married with marital relations, but not, and you had no shidduch ahead of time. There was no agreement to it ahead of time. So essentially, it was like a last minute thing, and that really shows sort of an inappropriate type of behavior. And some people say, no, it was any kind of case of marriage through cohabitation, because that is a licentious type of behavior. And so there we have it. That's the list. And again, the point is that the rabbis would like us, it seems from this Gemara, to do ma'amar prior to doing the marital relations that creates yibum. Okay, so how do we do ma'amar? So Tana Rabbanan, this has been I've been anticipating this the entire time since our Mishnah, since our parak began a few days ago. Ketzad ma'amar, how do we do ma'amar? Nosein la kesef, shava kesef. You give money or the equivalent of money. And Rashi says, if we take a look in Rashi, it's opposite the Tosfos of the Mevatel Gita. And it says, "V'amar la hiskadshi li b'ma'amar Yevamot," and you are married to me, you are sanctified to me through with this ma'amar of Yevamot. And so, as a result, that act of saying those words with the giving of the money, that constitutes the marriage. Uvishtar ketzad. And with the shtar, and you can also use a shtar and ketzad. How do you do it? The shtar ketzad, I don't understand. What do you mean? How do you do it with a shtar? Kida amran, as we already learned that elsewhere. Ksavla al haniyar ol acheres. You can write on any kind of material, whether it's paper or earthenware or pottery. Even if that object is not worth a shava pruta, is not worth a pruta, you can just doing writing is sufficient. So all you have to write is Harei at Mikudeshesli. You are hereby betrothed to me. So shouldn't it just work the same way? Namely, just write, Harei at Mikudeshesli here. So Amar Abaye. Hachakamar, shtar ksuva yevamin ketzad. How do we do the ksuva of a yevamin, of a yibum situation? And so the answer with respect to a ksuva, what do we say? We say kosev law. We write for the widow, Anna Ploni Bar Ploni. I am this person. I'm John Doe, the son of John Doe. Could be Kabilis Yas Plonis Yevimti Alai. And I've accepted this woman, Plonit, this woman, my Yevama upon me. Lazon Ulafarnasa, to give her food and to give her support, Karaoi, as is appropriate. However, the ksuva, the obligation to support her after death, or in the case of divorce, that is not my obligation. That is the first husband's obligation. That is the obligation of the estate of the first husband. If, however, there is no estate left from the first husband, well, then takinu la rabbana masheni. So the rabbi said, no, so he's going to have to give from his own property. Why? Because we don't want him to think that it's too easy to divorce her. And I will note that indirectly, even the material that goes from the first husband's estate is also, remember, the first husband's estate goes to the man, to the brother who marries his widow. And so as a result, that is truly the second husband's property. And so even though it is written as it comes from the first husband's estate, it is important to note that there's an incentive not to get divorced, because he will lose that money from what he would otherwise inherit. And so the point is that the rabbis want to try and ensure that the society diminishes and makes more difficult the process of divorce, so that people are encouraged to marry seriously and to stay married. So now Abaye asks Rabbah, Nasan la get Amar. Now, what happens if he gave a get? So now we're going to do. We're going to change the story. We're back to the drawing board, so to speak. And it's important to note that a divorce decree, even though when we give it in modern day, we give a divorce decree that is unqualified. It is a total divorce on separation. However, because it is a written document, one can write whatever conditions they wanted into the document. And so what happens if one writes certain conditions into the document? For example, so Abaye asked Rabba, Noson la get v'amar. If you give a get and say, and here you're not writing it in the document, but you're expressing the conditions. Harei at migureshes heimeni v'i at muteres l'kol adam. You are divorced from me, but not allowed to marry anyone else. Get mahu. What is the law? Similarly, okay. So, and this is in a situation where the woman is a yavam, is Yevamot, is the widow. So we're dealing with Reuven, who was married to Rachel. Reuven dies. Shimon now does yibum. Rather than doing yibum, he gives a get to Rachel. That's an indication of his intention to do a chalitza. But he says, I am not allowing you to marry anyone you want. So get Yevamot Rabbanan who? Do we say that this is a rabbinic get, and therefore get to Mahani Be'eshes Ish Mahani Yevamot, that only a get that would work with respect to a regular married woman, and this get would not work with a regular married woman. In a regular married woman, if I were to give a get to my wife that says, you are hereby divorced from me, but you're not allowed to marry anyone else, that is not a valid get, and my wife would not be divorced from me. And so get to Mahani, but get to Lo Mahani Be'eshes Lo Mahani B'Yevamot, and that therefore a get that does not work in the case of a marriage would also not work in the case of a Yevamot, Odoma, or maybe do we say that we might think that it was a valid get, and as a result, we want to make sure that the people don't get married. So the real question that we're being asked here is, when Reuven dies and Shimon, instead of doing chalitza, gives Rachel a get and says that this get, it makes you divorced from me, but not free to marry anyone else. Can he change his mind? Can Shimon now, because this wasn't a valid get, can Shimon now change his mind? Not sure Rachel would really want to take him, but can he change his mind and say, you know what? I want to marry you after all, and now let's do yibum. Can he do that? Or do we say that if he were to give a valid get to her, he would have to do chalitza? Do we say that here as well he has to do chalitza? So Amarle Rabba responds, no, we're really concerned that we might think that this was a valid get, and therefore people might say, oh, look, he gave a valid get and then he did yibum, and so as a result, that would lead to real problems. So Maskefle Rabba Bar Chanan said, 1 second, if you're saying that, why would we say, what if Shimon gave Rachel a blank piece of paper? Shouldn't we say that and said, you are divorced by this? Meaning, if he says that, isn't that sufficient? Why, if you're going to be so concerned that maybe the piece of paper will be switched out and go from an invalid piece of paper to a valid piece of paper, well, let the paper be blank. So Amar Abaye, Amar Lay, so excuse me. So the difference is, the reason that Abaye's question is only about a written document, Hasam lo pasal b'chahuna. That's because a blank piece of paper, if a man gives his wife a blank piece of paper and says, you are hereby divorced, that will not constitute even a scent of a divorce. And therefore, if the man drops dead and now the widow wants to marry a Kohen, it's a big difference, because a widow is allowed to marry a Kohen, but a divorcee is not. And so as a result, when we say that the blank piece of paper doesn't work, it's because a blank piece of paper, no one would say is ever a valid get. And so in that situation, if a man gives his wife a blank piece of paper and says, you're divorced from me, and then drops dead, she's still allowed to marry a Kohen. However, but in our case, where you give what looks like to be a valid get, and you make an oral qualification that makes it invalid, now we do say that that wife is prohibited to marry a Kohen. So even though she's not actually divorced from her husband, and the husband has to give a new get, the husband if the husband drops dead, she is not allowed to marry a Kohen, because there is a scent of divorce here. And the Tanya, because we're going to prove this distinction from a brisa, the Isha Gerusha Isha lo yikachu. The Torah says you're not allowed to marry a woman divorced from her husband. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman divorced from her husband. Afilu lo niskarsha ela me'isha. Even if the woman is only divorced from her husband and not permitted to marry any other man. Meaning, when a husband gives an invalid get to his wife, the two of them are no longer allowed to be together. But it's an invalid get. She's also not allowed to marry anyone else. And so even that, the Torah is telling us, is going to prohibit her when she eventually becomes free and able to marry, such as if her husband dies. Even in that situation, lo yikachu, they're not allowed to marry, a Kohen's not allowed to marry her. Why? Because it is just the scent of a get, the smell of a get, that is causing her to be invalid to marry a Kohen. So Amar Rami Bar Chama, a related question that now Rami Bar Chama asks. Hare Amru, Amar Echad Lavlar. If somebody tells a scribe, Kasuv get la arusa si, ulkesher sena agarshen. Write if I've done kedushin with this woman, I've said harei mekudeshesly, but I have not done nisuin with this woman. I have not done the final act of marriage with this woman. And so I'd like you to write a divorce decree, and I can give it to her when I actually finish the marriage process. Harei zet get. That is a valid divorce decree. Why? Because at the moment, he has if he wants to separate from her, he has an obligation to divorce her. So there is already a connection between the husband and the wife. It is something that exists today, and therefore he can write a divorce decree. However, and now we turn to Nunbet Amabet, Alma, if in fact, instead of writing this divorce decree for the woman that he's already done irison to, he asks that it be written for a woman to whom he has not yet married at all. And the idea is that for when the get is for when I marry this woman, aim get. That is not considered a valid get. Because he has no ability to divorce her now. Boy, Rami Bar Chama. So based on these two principles, Rami Bar Chama now asks the following question. Livim Tomahu. What about a Yevamot case? What about it when Ruvain dies, and now Rachel has the potential of doing Yibum or Chalitza with Shimon the brother. And now, before doing Yibum, Shimon says to John Doe, the get writer, the sofer, write a get for me for Rachel, so that when I do Yibum with her, if I want, I could give her the get. So ain get. Do we say that it's not a valid get because he has no biblical ability to divorce her now? Or right? So I'm sorry, I read back up a few lines. So livim tomahu kaven de agida bay karusa damya. Do we say that she's bound to him like an arusa, and therefore the get works? Oh, Dilma kaven de ovid mamar, or because maybe he has not yet done mamar. So teku. The Gemara does not answer it. We are unclear as to the final result. Is that considered? What kind of nature is that Zika relationship? So Rav Chananya. So now Rav Chananya asks another question. So a different question. So now Rav Chanina, asks a different question. So kasav get lazikaso v'lo l'ma'amaro. Now, what happens if he qualifies the get in a different way? And he says to the woman, I am giving you this get for our Zika relationship, but not for a Mamar relationship, meaning I did Mamar with her. The Mamar happened between Shimon and Rachel. And now he says, I'm only giving you this get in connection with our Zika relationship and not our Mamar relationship. Or he says, or he says, I'm only giving you this get for our Mamar relationship and not our Zika relationship. So Mamar ilave Zika kabrami. Do we say that the Mamar and Zika are a single unit? The Havalei Kimigarish are two separate pieces, two separate halves. The Havalei Kimigarish Chatzi Isha, and it's like you divorced half of your wife. And we say that you didn't do anything. Or do we say that each item, the Zika relationship is its own thing, and the Mama relationship is its own thing? The Tivshalei midirava. So now let's see if we can resolve it from what Rava said. The Amar Rava nasan get lamamaro. If you give a get to the person to whom mamar was done, hutra tarasa, her co-wives become permitted to be taken in yibum by another one of by his brother, if when he dies. So right. So in other words, that the get works only for mamar and not for the zika, and that is sufficient. So l'Rava pshitale, l'Rav Chananya mibayle. So for Rava it was obvious, but for Rabbi Chananya it was not obvious, and so he was asking the rule, and the answer is so what is the law? Teku. It is unclear what the situation is. And so as a result, you want to be sure to avoid that situation. Okay, so now we've dealt with a few interesting situations of partial get situations in connection with Yibum. We go back to our Mishnah. our Mishnah said chalatz v'asa mamar, that if one did chalitza and then did mamar, or frankly any of the other actions the Mishnah continues, there's no validity to anything after the chalitza. The chalitza ends the relationship. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Zo Divrei Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Ein Kedushin Tosin B'Chayavin Lavin. This statement must be according to Rabbi Akiva, because he's the one that says that there's no marriage effect if there is a lav relationship. Because of course Rabbi Akiva says that such a relationship, if there's even a Torah prohibition that's a lav, the child that comes out of that relationship is a mamzer. And the reason is because there's no marriage that takes effect. So, and it is possible to have a relationship after chalitza. Why? Because let's go back and remind ourselves of a few rules. The first rule is a brother's wife is prohibited, and the prohibition is a kares prohibition. But then there is yibum, and yibum turns that from a prohibition into permission. But then chalitza happens, and now there's a new prohibition that occurs, and the new prohibition is not a kares prohibition; it is a lav prohibition. It is not as serious. The punishment is lashes, not, I believe, lashes, and not kares, not death from heaven. And so, as a result, now, so why is that all important? Because we also have a debate between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. Rabbi Akiva says that you can't do marriage with someone with whom there is a lav for you to marry them, for you to have relations with them. Whereas the Chachamim say you shouldn't do that marriage, but it is a valid marriage. And therefore, even after Shimon does chalitza with Rachel, if he then goes and says, Hareyat mikudeshes li b'tavad zu kudas Moshe v'Yisrael, and she accepts the ring, and they decide to get married, it is a valid marriage according to the Chachamim. And so the statement that we made of saying that nothing can have a legal effect after chalitza is not true for the Chachamim. And so that is why Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says that when our Mishnah says that there's nothing that can happen that's legal, with legal validity after chalitza is done, it's talking about consistent with Rabbi Akiva. But 1 second, how do you work the following with respect to Rabbi Akiva? We have a statement in the beginning of our Mishnah that said the following: Nasan get v'asa mamar. If first you give a get and then you do mamar, sricha get v'chalitza. You need to do a get in order to undo the mamar, and you need chalitza. The Rabbi Akiva, and if you say that this statement is Rabbi Akiva, Kavan the Yavla get, since a get was given to the woman at the beginning, Mima Hani Bamamar, there's a law that now exists. And so as a result, how could Mamar work? But Tanya, we learned in a brayso, so Rabbi Akiva Omer, Minayalanosin get lived in Toshin Esra Alav Olamid. How do I know that once a Shimon gives a get to Rachel as the first act after Reuven dies, and thereby Shimon is no longer allowed to marry Rachel, because Shneimar lo yuchal ba'ala harishon asher shulcha. He's not allowed to take, the first husband's not, who divorced her, is not allowed to take her back. So achar shiluach, after divorce. So even that get. So that seems to suggest that a lav exists. So how could Mamar do anything after a get? So Amar Rav Ashi, get Yevamin to Midrabanan. remember, the get in connection with the rabbinic issue, the get with respect to a yibum is a rabbinic decree. It is not biblical. Ukra, and that pasuk that Rabbi Akiva cited of Lo Yucha Bala Arishon Asher Shalcha, that pasuk is only an asmachta, ukra asmachta ba'alma. That is just a potential reference. It is not actually a biblical citation. So Tanya Nami Hachi, and we have a brisa that supports this idea. Rebbe says, Eina dvarim halalu amurim elu divrei Rabbi Akiva. That when we said that there's no validity to any action that happens after the chalitza, that's according to Rabbi Akiva. Shahaya osa chalutza ke'erva, because he's the one who makes a chalutza like an erva. It is like, for other people, like even kedushin does not take an effect. But the chachamim say there can be a marriage after chalitza. It violates the Torah, but it's only a lav, and therefore the marriage actually takes effect. And Rebbe continues, and I say, Amasai, when do we allow kedushin after chalitza to take effect? Bisman shekidsha l'shum ishus. That is, if the kedushin that happens is in order to do a traditional marriage. Aval kidsha l'shum yavmus. But if you were to try and do yibum and do a kiddush for yibum, you were to do mamar. Well, then ein achar chalitza klum. Then it does not, nothing works after chalitza. And we can see that effectively this could be an understanding that would be consistent with the chachamim, that the idea is that when we said ein achar chalitza klum, we weren't talking about a brand new marriage. We were talking about trying to do yibum. A yibum related action doesn't work after chalitza. And so with that, we'll conclude for today, and we will do some more analysis of, I believe, of Rebbe's statement, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi. You have a good day.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Same to you.